Life as a mother is challenging as it is, and yet sometimes we make things harder for ourselves than it has to be. Self-sabotage is a real issue that many of us face in all areas of our lives, and often we don't even realize it's happening. When you can identify patterns of self-sabotage in your own life and understand that you have the power to make a change, a world of possibilities opens up. Instead of living in complacency and feeling unfulfilled, you can achieve a life that feels truly aligned with what you desire. Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. So, how do we overcome self-sabotage? That is the big question in today's episode. And joining me is Samantha Hawley, a journal expert who has experienced many life transitions that come with big emotions, from moving 8 times in 10 years, becoming a mother, getting divorced when her son was 9 months old, and feeling unfulfilled in her corporate job. Samantha has been able to intentionally shift her life in big ways. And she is here to share what overcoming self-sabotage can look like in your own life. So, Samantha, welcome to the podcast. So happy to have you here. Can you just tell us about yourself, your family, and what it is that you do?
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. And yes, I live in Buffalo, New York. So we were just talking, it's snowing at the time of this recording. It's very chilly. And I live with my son. I have full custody of him, and he is 4 years old now. So it is him and he is a handful. He's a very sensitive and emotional kid, which is a lot, but at the same time, I feel like I'm raising him in this way. And it's so opposite of how I grew up. I was raised and maybe even just put it on myself to be the positive Polly, positive Patty, the person who like is always optimistic and never addresses any negative emotions. And I was that way all the way up until I had my son, truthfully. I had my son when I was living in North Carolina. So I was away from all family, all friends. I didn't know anybody except my husband at the time. And it was December 19th of 2020. So he's a COVID baby. It was December 19th of 2020. And I just remember sitting on the couch next to my now ex-husband and feeling so overwhelmed. That was like the one word that kind of bottled up inside of me, but I couldn't explain anything. I couldn't like voice anything. And so I was like, I'm just going to go journal. I'm just going to write this out. I need to get it out of my brain and onto paper. And I locked myself in our spare bedroom because I didn't know what was going to come out. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to cry. I don't know like what's going to happen. And I wrote the words vent session on the top of the page. And I ended up writing for about 3 pages of just all the things. I remember writing about how I felt like I was dropping the ball as a mom, as a business owner, um, for myself, as a spouse, all the things. And there was no solutions that came out of it, but it just felt so validating. And it felt like it was the first time that I was validating the hard. And it felt so good and so beautiful. And I felt like there was something to this and I wanted more of it. And so that's where I am now, how that all started is I just slowly but surely, it wasn't consistent right away, but I started journaling and I started honoring the big emotions that are often hard to deal with. And I came up with a process of how to do that in a way that felt strategic and where I got to a point where I did have action items at the end. And people started asking me about how I was able to go through my divorce and it at least appeared like I was doing it really well and I was like still happy throughout it and knew what I wanted and came out on the other side like even better. And so I started providing journal prompts to other women and made a whole business out of it.
I love that. I think that is so incredible. On the side of like you were able to do that and then help other women with that as well from what you learned, but also just the impact that having an outlet can have in these major life transitions and experiences. I mean, I think first for all of us, COVID, if you became a mom during that time or if you had little kids during that time or big kids, it was such a I mean, what word do you use? It was such just an intense experience. And then just all the other things that we go through in motherhood, in life and relationships. I am going through a divorce right now, and I know that for me, having outlets to just express it and to vent, like just to get it out of
Yeah.
my body and out of my mind has been incredible. And then me being able to, it's been really hard, but being able to show up as like, I am okay. I am good. And sometimes I am great. I am thriving in this. And I think a lot of that is being able to express strategically the things that I need to express and just getting it out. And so I think that's incredible. I am so excited to learn from you more about like how that all works. We are going to be talking about self-sabotage. And before we get into that, I just want to like address that the word self-sabotage feels kind of mean. I don't know if that's like the
Mhm.
right way to say it, but it's almost like we are doing things to ourselves to prevent us from moving forward. And well, yes, like that kind of is what it is. I just want to like make sure that everyone listening knows this is all coming from a place of like compassion and wanting you to be self-compassionate as well, right? Because we all do things that are not in the best interest of ourselves. And there's nothing to be ashamed of there. And so I just want to say that. I don't know if people listening, you may not feel that way about that word, but I know for me that it kind of like, there's kind of almost a sense of like I'm doing something wrong if I'm sabotaging my success and path forward. And like that's not what it's about. It's about like opening the pathway for just what we are capable of and what we deserve in life. So I'm just gonna put that out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It feels judgy and
Yes.
like,
Yes.
and the whole thing is that we want to have compassion for
Yes.
ourselves and to feel better. If we don't look at what we're doing, then we can't feel better and we're going to keep doing it. And I think the people that often look at these self-sabotaging behaviors know that they're doing it, right? It's the women who know that they're like in their own way for some reason. I know before I even told myself that I was self-sabotaging. For me, I was like a huge procrastinator in like all areas of my life and I hated it. I tried so many things to like stop it, but it was so frustrating to me, you know? And so I feel like that's the type of person, hopefully, that is listening to this. It's like you already might feel judgment
Yeah,
for yourself. And so hopefully after this episode, you'll like show some love and compassion for that side of you and then have the tools to work through it.
absolutely. Yeah, that's my complete goal with this as well. Compassion is such a huge piece of the journey and it's so important. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it. So what is self-sabotage and how do you see it showing up for moms in particular? Like what kind of behaviors?
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I used to think self-sabotage only showed up in the sense of reaching a goal. So like if I didn't reach a goal, it
Yeah.
was maybe because I sabotaged myself. But outside of like goals or work related, I was just like, oh, it's just who I am. Like I've just procrastinated on something. And then two things. One, when I started to journal, especially post divorce, I started to ask myself, how do I want to show up in the world? And like, who do I want to become? And part of doing that, I was asking myself, who am I now? And I was realizing that I had tendencies of like being really quiet in relationships. I realized and I knew this about myself, but I felt like this like little tiny mouse in my marriage, especially when around my ex-husband's family. And so I was just started asking myself, like, why is that? Why was I so quiet? Why was I not like speaking up? And I learned that like that is a self-sabotaging behavior. It's like not using your voice. And it was really hard to look at and to like actually go through those memories. But after learning that, that's kind of what triggered me to think, oh, like that wasn't a goal at all. But it was the one way that I was sabotaging my marriage. Ultimately, I was really taking accountability for my role in the divorce as well. And then it opened up the doors of like, okay, there's so many different ways that we self-sabotage. And I learned that sabotage, some people say, is the root of all stress, of all negative emotions, which blew my mind. And that triggered me to think, okay, what are those different areas that we feel stress? Because we feel stress so often, especially as moms, right? We feel it in parenting and just existing as a mom. We feel it even like when the alarm goes off in the morning and we want to press snooze and we hope our kids are still sleeping and they're not going to run into our rooms, right? And so I was going through all these scenarios, and there's actually 10 different ways that we self-sabotage. And there's a quiz that you can take. I can send you the link so that your listeners
Yeah.
can take it. But one of them, my top one, was people pleasing. So the way that this might show up as a mom is like saying yes to things that you're for like requests that your kids might have that you don't actually want to say yes to, or maybe that your kid's teacher asked you to do, right? Like things that you don't really want to do, but you're just saying yes to please other people. And that quickly jumps over to the saboteur, the sabotage of avoiding. People pleasers often do things to avoid conflict. I once reached out to a friend and I was like, my kid is so emotional and he's like not sleeping and I'm having so many issues. And she was the one that brought it to my attention. She was like, but do you think you're doing any of these things to avoid the meltdown? And I was like, oh my God, yes. Like, I will do anything to avoid even more meltdowns. So, whatever you got to do to avoid meltdowns. Like, I was literally giving my kid chocolate right before bed just because I didn't want one more meltdown that day. But also, avoiding is like dissociation, like sitting at the tub when your kids are having a bath, depending on how old your kids are, and like scrolling your phone, like looking off to the side, or cooking dinner while also thinking of the to-do list that you have to do the next day, or during family time, like thinking of all of the things that you have to do, just being distracted, all the way down to feeling like almost like you're a control freak that might feel like it's effective and like, oh, my kids have great routines and I have a great routine, but it can really get in your way as a mom because it almost makes us more impatient when things don't go according to plan and too rigid and not present with our families because we're so focused on gotta brush your teeth, gotta get
Hmm.
in the car, gotta do this. And like the hyper achiever, like signing up our kids for all of the things. I feel like that's a trend right now. A lot of moms with kids my son's age, they're constantly doing things with their kids. And I dropped my son off with a sitter a couple weeks ago. And it was during the day on a Saturday because I needed some personal time. And when I picked him up, the sitter said, do you have any plans for the rest of the day? And I said, nope, we're just coming home. We're just going to relax. And she was like, oh, well, that's okay. And in my head, I'm like, obviously it's okay. Like, of
Yeah.
course, that's my dream. It's like relaxing. But it was just like this aha moment of like, kids don't have downtime. Like, parents and moms, especially, are like, make sure like every single minute of kids' days are filled. And part of that is the saboteur of hyperachiever. And all these things that I'm mentioning lead moms to feel impatient, which I already mentioned, but not present with their kids, resentful, especially the people pleasing, like you're not doing anything for yourself, exhausted, depleted. And it's just when you zoom out, it's you feel like you don't have time for yourself and you're like, your days are a blur. Like when your brain is in this mode, you literally cannot create memories or retain memories. So it's just like you're in this whirlwind and it all comes down to the way that you self-sabotage. And oh, I
Yeah.
want to say too, 95% of this is subconscious, so you're not doing it on purpose. So, 'cause speaking of compassion, all of these traits, like I said, my top one is people pleaser. We learn this by the age of 5 to 7 years old. So a lot of this is safety. I grew up, I have a twin sister, and she was very sick as a baby, like when we came home from the hospital. And I truly believe that I became a people pleaser because she needed so much. And so I witnessed this as a baby, like I truly didn't even know. And that's just like what I learned as a child. And so it's just our job now as
Yeah.
adults, especially as moms, and we're teaching our kids this to take ownership and to change those habits.
Yeah, that all is, it makes so much sense. I really appreciate the way that you've explained what it means to self-sabotage in the sense that like most of us probably do think it's like in terms of a goal. Like I'm not letting myself get there because of fear of success or fear of failure. And it happens like that, but it also can be really just something that's like things we do that keep us from living as our authentic selves and in this authentic way that reflects like how we actually want to show up with our values. And the influence of the messages we take in, like you said, it's like these things that we see as a child. It's important to like say it's like the societal impacts and familial impacts, like everything that comes in and informs then how we as ourself may kind of sabotage that connection to our authentic self, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not because of us. It's not because we're like some, bad person or some like inadequate person who is people pleasing. It's like, no, the people pleasing comes from XYZ. And the amount of compassion we can have when we can recognize that and understand like these tendencies we may have, these patterns of behavior we have the responsibility and the agency to address that, but there's no like shame in fault. It's really like this is for whatever reason, safety, belonging, any getting needs met, like we've developed these tendencies and that's okay. That's just the way it is. And our kids will have their things and every person has their things. And so, yeah, we can take responsibility and address it, but there doesn't have to be the shame element involved.
Hmm. Yes, I actually often think so. Like I said, my son is 4, and already I'm thinking like, I wonder what my son's will be, well, like
Yeah.
what his top one, because you can have the best childhood, and I feel like I did have a great childhood. I had very present parents, and I have no complaints about my childhood. Whereas you see other people who like, do not have the best childhood, and
Yeah.
they were in like very volatile, homes and whatnot. And no matter how you grew up, we all have this. And the top saboteur that we all have, and it's not even ranked. So if you take that quiz that I send, it's not even ranked because it's number one for everybody,
Yeah.
is the judge. It's how we judge ourselves and how we judge other people. And when you start to bring awareness to the way that you show up and the way that your saboteurs show up, it's so easy to judge that. I'm leading a group right now, and we're highlighting each of these different areas that we self-sabotage. And the first step is awareness of like catching the way that you people please or the way that you are hyper achieving on this day. And I started to notice this in them. They would say, like, oh my gosh, I hyperachieved today in this way. And then they would attach it to judgment of some kind. And I'm like, okay, the before that, like, oh, become aware and immediately like put your hand on your heart and like think of your younger self, because like you just said, it's truly out of the need of like safety and love, and as a kid it all comes back down to that, and it's sometimes hard to grasp as an adult because we don't think that way anymore, but as a kid that's our deepest fear, is like
Yeah.
having love taken away from us, having food taken away from us, and so we do what we got to do to show up in that way, and going to like the hyperachiever, my son's birthday was a couple months ago, and my dad had gotten a bounce house for him, and it was like stayed around after his birthday. And so a couple days later, I picked him up from daycare, and he said he wanted to go over to the bounce house. And I was like, okay, sure, because we never have this bounce house, right? So let's go over. But in the back of my mind, I was like, but I'm not really done with work for the day. I was going to go home and like bring out my laptop and get a little bit done while he was doing something. And so I thought, I'm going to just watch him bounce as I finish my work. And I was like, okay, it's like the best of both worlds. But
Yeah.
then we get over to my parents' house, which is right next door. And he says, Mommy, will you bounce with me? And immediately I was like, that's self-sabotage, because by me going home to get my laptop, I am sabotaging the way that I personally want to show up. Like, I want to be that present mom. I want to create this memory of bouncing in the bounce house with my son, like just me and him, right? And if I were to say no to that, I'm taking that away from me. I'm taking that away from my son. So just a silly example, but like an everyday example that pops up of how it's linked to like the way that we show up and the way that we want to parent too.
Yeah. It's such a great example of how it is so tied to our values and what we want, and it's what's getting in the way of that, and how like you have to be aware of what you want, what you actually truly value, what's actually important to you, to be able to like step back and say, what is this? Is this actually how I want to be showing up in this way? And is, deciding to open the laptop in that moment actually the thing that's holding me back from experiencing this moment in the way that I actually would want to and is aligned with my values? That's a really
Yes.
interesting, simple example that it's like, okay, this is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and in other moments and for other moms, that would be a boundary where you would
Yeah.
say, nope, I need 10 minutes to finish this and then I'll bounce and then we'll do something else. So that's a really good point. It does come down to like, what is it that you personally value? And that's another journaling, endeavor that you can go on is like, how is it that you want to parent? And I often find that it comes down to what you feel like you were lacking as a child. So I feel like, again, I have the best childhood, but connection is so important to me. Feeling heard is so important to me. And I think it's because I had a twin sister and then an older sister who was only 15 months older. And I felt like as a pleaser, I kind of got lost in the shuffle. I never spoke up, right? And so anytime my son gives me that opportunity, I bend over backwards to give him that. And so I'm now as a mom trying to find that balance between like self-sabotaging myself still, but also like giving that opportunity for him. And as a mom, feeling centered and grounded in all those teeny tiny decisions throughout the day.
Yeah. What you just said there about like describing yourself as a child and the connection and having sisters close in age. I'm like, I'm gonna journal on that because I feel like I relate to that so hard. I have two sisters who are both not very much younger than me, and I am totally that pleaser. I did everything, quote, right. I was like the
Yeah.
good, easy kid. And I, like you said that, I'm like, yeah, I wonder how that's showing up in my life and how I am, you know, like in what ways? It's just an interesting thing. Just the response I had when you said that makes me feel like there's something probably there for me
Mm,
to dig
for
into a little
sure.
bit. So
Yeah,
earlier
I
you
often
brought,
find the
yeah,
good girl does.
yes, right. I know it's such a thing. And I think for a lot of our listeners, there's a lot of listeners out there who can identify with that good girl, that pleaser who didn't need
Mhm.
much. So
Yeah,
how is that showing up in our lives now? And how are
yeah.
we sabotaging those connections or not holding strong enough boundaries because we feel so like indebted to give that connection forward because we wanted it or
Mm,
needed it more. And it's an
mhm.
interesting thing to think about. You mentioned earlier how a lot of this is tied to stress. And I'm wondering if you can kind of identify the link between stress and overwhelm and self-sabotage.
Yeah, I'll try and give a simple example. So, if you can kind of picture yourself or remove yourself if it's too much and picture somebody else, picture like a mom that's working all day. And even at work, maybe that's her sanctuary, or maybe she's like high stressed there and like doing all the projects and whatnot. And then she comes home and she has this time in between where it's like, she's got her work hat on and then she immediately has to step into mom mode. And depending on the age of your kids, as a mom, you come home, you have to start dinner, you have to do bedtime routine. So, bath, PJs, you might have to play sometime within there. You hope that your kid isn't having a meltdown. My son is 4, so like where I place his dinosaur nuggets on his dinner plate it definitely matters, or
Hmm.
else it's getting thrown somewhere. All of this stuff. And you're not even thinking about, you know, yourself at all in this. You're just hoping like you picked out the right PJs and that bedtime goes easy. He goes to sleep or they go to sleep at a decent time. And then you basically crash on your bed at the end of the night. You scroll your phone to try and dissociate. And like that's your me time. You wake up and you start all over again, right? Like you're going to bed burdened from the day and depleted, and you wake up with maybe a glimmer of like, okay, it's a new day. I can do this. But then, it's just on repeat, right? And that's like all of those sabotaging behaviors that we talked about is like the avoidance, the people pleasing, like the playing the victim as well. That's one of them is like the poor me, like my kids are crazy, or other moms are able to do this and I'm not, like all of that, and you're overwhelmed, you're stressed out, all of that. And so that's kind of the vision that I think of when I think of how our saboteurs show up and
Hmm.
make us more overwhelmed versus a contrary, a breath of fresh air is like coming home and yes, stepping into mom mode because we're moms, but imagine doing it from a place of like where you choose how you want to um, actually, this is a great example. I came home from picking up my son from daycare, and he always wants to have a little bit of playtime. So I put my phone down, we play a little bit. And a couple weeks ago, he brought out an it's not Halloween time when we're recording this, but I still have a Halloween decoration out. And it's like this little lantern. And he brought the lantern into my bedroom. He turned it on and he said, I want to have a campfire. And so we have this little campfire in my bedroom. And he goes into the kitchen, grabs like these mini marshmallows and cinnamon toast crunch. I think that's what it was. And he comes back into my room and we make these like, I guess, s'mores and we like are quote unquote roasting these marshmallows by the not,
Oh,
like candlelit
yeah.
fire. Like ridiculous. But I'm just like so present. And like the quickest way to beating self-sabotage, which we'll talk about later, is just like being present, like
Yeah.
being there. And so like I'm vividly in this like campfire moment with my son, and it's only 10 minutes, right? But then we go on and I like actually make him dinner and I'm like eating my dinner and then we have bath time. It's just I'm not distracted scrolling my phone at the same time and it's just peaceful. I feel patient. I'm present in the moment. I go to bed and even if there are meltdowns, even which there definitely are, but I'm like there with my son in his emotions with him and helping them through it. I'm not like yelling at him because of his emotions or like trying to just get to the end of the day, which is what I hear from a lot of my clients. It's just a more grounding day. And challenges still come up, but it doesn't feel as hard because you're coming from this more centered place.
Yeah. So, as you're saying that, I'm wondering why doing that and sticking to that is so hard for so many of us because it sounds so simple, right? Like just be present. But obviously, like it's not just that simple because then we would all be doing that, tapping into that. So, what's kind of keeping us stuck with these self-sabotaging patterns?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I think it does go back to the fact that these were ingrained in us when we were, up to 5 and 7 years old. And a lot of us don't think that. We put the blame on like recent experiences, right? Or we put the blame on like, oh, since high school, I've been doing this and I need to break it. And I think showing ourselves compassion for like, this was actually a safety mechanism. That alone, I think, will help us stick to the solution.
Hmm.
Um, but again, because of that, like if you did anything for however many years old you are, I'm 36 years old. So like that's a lot of years to start to break a habit. And then the other thing too is there's so many dopamine hits these days that it's just so hard to actually stick to something. And when you try and, like I said, procrastinating was the number one thing. I would try something. And then after a week or week and a half, I would like honestly forget what it was that I was trying or just get distracted or fall off. And it's because, again, I was doing that thing for 36 years or something would distract me, something would come up. And the solution to overcoming self-sabotage is honestly so simple so that you can keep doing it, so that it's something to break. And an analogy that I like to think of when showing myself compassion to like of why we feel these things so deeply and why it's so hard to break people pleasing. Like it's hard to stop that. And when you think of all the different areas of life that you're doing it, is when you're a baby, we're born like without any teeth, for example. And then we grow teeth so that we can start to chew foods, right? We're born with the digestive system to only, drink milk, and then our digestive systems can start to eat food. We literally can't eat food as babies. And so our bodies like physically develop beyond what we have as babies. But these safety mechanisms don't do that. This is all mental and it's all subconscious, which 95% of our habits and thoughts and behaviors is subconscious. And so this is truly something that we do have to bring attention to and work on. Otherwise, it goes unnoticed. We think it's who we are when it's not. It's who we learned to be. So I think that again, that compassion and yeah, just focusing on that is why it will make it easier to, do it beyond those 2 weeks.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So, how do we then, big question, how do we start to overcome these self-sabotaging patterns? What does that look like?
Yeah, it feels like a big question, but it's actually pretty simple. And so the first thing is, as with anything I've noticed with journaling, is awareness. It's just to notice, which I think is sometimes the hardest part because again, that's when you start to judge yourself for it, but try to do it without any judgment and just notice like what's coming up for you. And if that's hard, it might be hard to step into that. Just notice when you don't feel good. Like when are you very stressed? When are you like at your wit's end? When are you arguing with somebody? That's typically when there's some sort of sabotage at play. So then notice what's coming up for you. What's your saboteur if you take the quiz? And then having some awareness of your past. I think that there's a lot of benefit to journaling of like how did this impact you in your past? Also, how is it impacting you currently? Like what's happening in your life currently?
Hmm.
And even in the future, like what do you have going on in the future? I'm one that does not do well on the spot. So like even still, if somebody says like, "Hey Sam, can you do this for me?" Most likely I'm going to say yes. So I like to think in advance of like, could somebody ask me about this or what do I have in my day going forward or in a few months? And I like to process, okay, this is what's going to get in the way. In fact, I did this with a client right before this. She's considering going back to school. And she's a mom and she knows that she's a hyperachiever and she's really worried that it's going to cause her more stress and like being really short fused with her kids. And so we went through like, how is that hyperachiever going to show up? So, anyways, bringing awareness to that. And then there's actually a unique way to what I call disrupt the saboteur in real time. And it's usually something pretty small, but one way that is good for every saboteur is that present moment. It's like feeling grounded in your body. It's getting out of your head. So it's like feeling your fingertips and like your actual fingerprints, right? And just like getting grounded in that will instantly take you out of it to at least give you some space in between the sabotaging behavior and what you actually want to do or how you want to be thinking.
Yeah, I can see how how taking that quiz and having kind of this understanding of what might be getting in the way before trying to stop and do the reflection could be really helpful. I mean, doing the quiz is a lot of reflection, right, on how you're showing up and what is showing up in the way of things, but you can then start to like look for that in your life when you are having those feelings of like, I am so stressed right now. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm not showing up the way I want to. How is this one thing possibly what's getting in the way? Maybe not. Maybe not in that instance. Maybe it's something else, but it gives you a starting point of what to look for because that reflection can be really tricky, especially when you're like in the chaos of it, right? Like that's the
Yes.
whole issue is like it's hard to stop and reflect. That's why we're not
Mhm.
doing it. And so if you can have the things to be looking out for,
Yeah.
that can kind of give you that step forward, that way to like, okay, this is what's getting in the way here. Now let me look at that. Let me really like lay that out. And I love what you said about then kind of like pre-planning for how to not let that get in the way. Because again, when you are in the overwhelm, when the thing is happening, doing something then may be hard if you haven't already thought about how you want to respond to that. I mean, that's why we kind of keep up with those patterns of like always saying yes or, shutting down, whatever it is, right? And so if you can kind of be prepared for that and say, okay, I'm not going to just say yes to anything. This is how I'm going to handle it. You have like in your mind what you'll say, and you don't have to like be put on the spot so much. Like how helpful that can be in releasing the stress of doing something differently than you've always done it.
Hmm. Yeah, having that space to show up differently
Mhm.
is what it's all about. And I agree that the planning piece, and even if you don't execute it as well as you've like journaled out, it's still better than defaulting completely
Totally.
to the old behavior.
Yeah, like stopping the default, even if not perfectly, because I mean, we're going to have things. The goal is never to like become a blank slate, right? To become this person
Mhm.
who's not impacted by our childhoods. Like that's not,
Yeah,
we will always have these things underlying us and we will constantly be learning new things about ourselves as they come up, right? Because that's life. That is life.
yeah,
Um, but being able to know how to address it when it is coming forward and when it's impacting your life in a way that you don't want it to be impacting your life. Like we do
yeah.
have power, we do have agency in that. And what a beautiful thing to then have the tools to stop the self-sabotage, stop doing these things that are taking you further from who you are and what you want to be doing in your life, how you want to be showing up as a mom and in any other role, and just as you.
Yes. Yeah, I always say the goal isn't to never feel stress again, to
Mhm.
never feel anxiety ever again, to never people please ever again. We are humans and experiencing life. We are going to be feeling these things. What I want to encourage people to do is to be able to feel these things. And if we're dealing with the self-sabotage, to be able to literally snap your fingers and get to the other side of it rather than feel this thing and let it consume you and take you away from, like you
Mhm.
said, from the action that you want to be doing or showing up as the mom that you want to be. So again, it's not like eliminating these deep, dark feelings that you're feeling. It's about feeling them and like being able to regulate your nervous system and be okay with that and know that you're going to get on the other side like very soon. Like in there are exercises that I give that are literally 10 seconds. So like in 10 seconds you can start to feel better.
I love it. We all need that, right? We all need those quick wins that get us like, okay, we can do this. Like
Hmm.
you can do this. You have it in you to break the patterns and feel better.
Hmm.
Something that I really love asking at the end of these episodes is about self-care for moms because as moms, I think there's so much that can take us away from caring for ourselves, including just the societal messages we get and lack of time and energy, right? Like all the things together make that something that's worth pointing out and saying, hey, this is something important to talk about. So I would love to ask you how you care for yourself and just if you have any advice for moms to make sure that they are able to care for themselves regularly.
Well, one thing I do is I journal. I don't know if that's a good answer or not. But I noticed that I like to wake up before my son. I don't want to say early, and set that expectation for moms because we do so much, and some days I definitely do sleep in. But I notice I behave differently. I behave so much like calmer and feel so much better when I wake up a little bit before my son and have that time for myself. And in that time, 99% of the time I journal. And what I write about is whatever's on my brain. Sometimes it's like my to-do list, or it's just like if something was really hard the day before, or if I have a goal on my mind, or anything that's like feels a little sticky, if I want to talk about being the good girl, if I want to talk about the self-sabotage thing that pops up. So I just use that time to like release. That's like the biggest word is just like release, process if I have the time. And that alone just makes me feel like I can go about the rest of my day feeling lighter. And then the other thing that I do that I've been getting much better at is asking for help. As a single mom, especially with full custody, like I said a couple of weeks ago, I have sitters, but I dropped my son off at the sitter. So, because I'm like, it's different having somebody come to your home versus like, then I have to go somewhere. I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't want to go anywhere. I want to go take a nap or something. So, I've been getting better about asking people to help out with my son so that I can then have some personal time.
Yeah, I think all of that is really important. Finding the ways to have the time for yourself, whether that's the morning before your kid gets up, or also those bigger moments of like, no, I want to be in my house literally by myself. That
Yes.
that is like, I remember after my second son was born, that piece of like, I was like, take the kids and go somewhere. I just want to be in my house for an hour by myself, not somewhere else by myself, and not like with everyone downstairs. Like, I just, the
Yes.
difference it can make. So I think all of that
Hmm.
is really great advice and something that any mom who feels like she's not being cared for in the ways that she needs, that's a great place to start in just finding the time to be you and to do what you need to do, whether that's journaling or whatever else, right?
Hmm.
How can listeners get in touch with you? You have such great things to offer. Tell us about it. Tell us how we can find you and connect.
Oh, awesome. So the easiest way probably is on Instagram. My handle is at samantha.s.says. I'm super active in my DMs, so I'd love to have actually send me what your top saboteurs are. I would love to hear. But yeah, you can send me a message over there. I do have a website. I'll send you that if you want to put that in the show notes. And I
Yeah,
have a podcast called Journal Entries. And in there, I like to give some journal prompts too. So if you're into journaling, feel free to check that out too.
love it. All the resources. And I will definitely be going and taking that quiz. Curious to see what my top saboteur is because I have a feeling I know, but we'll see.
I will say you might feel a little bit attacked. There was the way that they give you the results. You'll feel seen and also like, oh, damn, like this is hard to read. But it's the beginning of the solution.
Yeah,
So
you
it'll
know
feel
what?
really good.
I'm all about the like gentle call out and like
Yeah.
when we talk about how important awareness is, I mean, it comes up on this podcast in almost every episode, talking about just being aware. It's huge
Yeah.
in making any sort of change in our lives or acceptance. Like it's the start of everything, right? And so if you have something that can like help you become more aware, I say that's a win, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Samantha, this has been such an awesome conversation. So many like actionable pieces too to take away. So I really appreciate you being here and sharing that with us. I'm excited for everyone to get to hear this one.
Oh, thanks so much, Emily. This is awesome.
Yes. And thank you for tuning in. What an awesome conversation. Let me know what you thought of it. I'd love to hear from you on Instagram. Send me a DM. And with that, I will see you next week. You are worthy, Mama.